All right, I want to welcome everyone to the Light Board meeting on June 22nd. Today we're going to be doing a rate hearing and we're going to be talking about Article 38. I first wanted to go over meeting minutes. Pam, you said I saw you sent around 2 sets of minutes. Do you think they're ready for review or approval?
April 27th is, and May 11th, I didn't hear from you, Brian.
Yeah.
So I think, having made the corrections that were presented to me, I think we're ready to roll with those.
So you think you're ready for both?
If you are.
Okay. Well, does anyone want discussion on either of the 2 sets of minutes?
Thank you.
I don't see anyone. Does anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes as distributed for April 27th, 2022 and May 11th, 2022 as drafted.
Second.
Sorry, can you go through that again? I think you added the 27th.
April 27th and May 11th.
Okay.
And I seconded.
We have a second. Great. Our roll call. Pam.
Yes.
Alice.
Yes.
Wendy.
Yes.
Warren, you can abstain.
Same.
Yeah, and I will approve as well. So we approve those sets of minutes. And I think,
Brian, can I just,
yeah.
may I just on a process point, I've been in touch with Karen, who's been very, very responsive and helpful. And I think our goal for June 8th and today is to have them to you before the end of the month. And I'd like to turn these around quickly. So I'm just offering that as an objective of mine. And I think Karen and I are on the same page, at least as to the month of June. So when you get them from me, I'd like responses quickly, and we'll try to move them.
Yes, can do. And it's great because now we are pretty much caught up, and we're only dealing with this month's minutes, which is awesome. So I want to keep moving. I want to talk about dates. Dave is not able to attend the August 10th meeting. I'd like to suggest we move the August 10th meeting 1 week later to August 17th. Is there any, do you think we can, my schedule says I'm open.
I did that date.
What was that, Wendy?
I said I can make that date.
Great. Alice, Pam, Warren?
I can also.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Well, there's some fluidity in my summer schedule, but right now it looks good.
Okay. All right. So we're going to move the August 10th meeting to the 17th. All right. And I wanted to take a quick moment to welcome Warren Leon to the board. He was appointed by Carrie earlier this week, and it's great to have him.
Thank you.
And, you know, this is more of a punishment than a reward, but, you know, here we are.
Not a punishment.
Really? Opportunity.
Opportunity.
All right. So I'm going to move us into the rate hearing to discuss the 3 rates we have to review. We need to do a roll call vote to open the rate hearing. Do we have to make
a motion? I'll make a motion that we suspend the regular meeting and open the rate hearing.
I second.
Okay. Great. And roll call, Wendy?
Yes.
Alex?
Yes.
Pam?
Yes.
Warren?
Yes.
Yes. So we'll open the rate hearing. And Dave, would you like to take this, or do you want Laura to lead the discussion on the changes?
I think, Laura, if you don't mind making just a quick summary of what we talked about in the earlier June meeting about the power cost adjustment and the need for it.
Oop,
You're on mute.
Yeah.
Do we want to just bring that PowerPoint up? I've got it available, or if you have it, Dave, it's from the June 8th meeting.
Yeah, if you want to bring it up.
Okay, so I'm just going to hit share screen. Oh, it's disabled.
You should be all set now.
Okay. Oh, that's not the best, but can everybody see this?
Yep.
Yep.
So basically the situation we have is that energy prices were on the rise prior to the beginning of the winter. We were seeing low inventories of natural gas. The political dynamics of oil were such that back in this section, we saw an increase in the price of all forms of energy. The blue here is natural gas. The brown is European crude oil. The black is US crude oil. And down here we have the petroleum products like gasoline and diesel. And we had instituted a PCA at the beginning of the winter to try to manage some of these costs. But then what happened was with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, we had a very dynamic shift in all prices. You can see the explosion really in natural gas prices, which isn't that unusual for the winter to see spikes, but to see this type of price in the spring, April, May, and June is very unusual. And as you know from your visits probably to the gasoline pump, for those of you who still drive combustion engine vehicles, gasoline and diesel prices are also just ridiculously high. And so we are trying to manage these increased costs. This just shows low natural gas inventory coming out of the winter. So we've got to rebuild stocks. This is what's happening with Massachusetts electricity prices. You can see they did spike in the winter, but then they've also been on the rise since the spring. And we talked about, I won't go through this in detail, but we talked about why do higher prices impact CMLP if we forward buy most of our energy? And the answer is we do forward buy most of our energy, but we leave about 20% open to the spot market by policy. And just that 20% is causing all this turmoil. So here's by month, the maroon is the portion that we have not forward purchased. The orange is the portion that we have forward purchased. So you can see it varies by month. The annual total for 2022 is expected to be 19%. But we did have a large amounts of power we had to buy from the market in January and February that were very expensive. And so what's happened is the blue cost is what we paid out in purchase power expense. And then the gray is what we collected in rates to pay for that power. So whenever the blue is bigger than the gray, our cash balances go down. And if the gray gets bigger than the blue, which is what we thought would happen when we came out of the winter, then we're building reserves. We knew when we set the 90-point PCA that it was not going to be enough to cover the winter. We purposely did it that way. If you remember, we had a vote. We said, okay, look, we could make it, I think, remember, it was 3.4 cents or something for just the winter months, or we could spread it out over the year. We said, well, let's spread it out over the year to eliminate or reduce rate shock for customers. And so we knew we wouldn't collect enough, but what we thought would happen is that these gray bars would be bigger than the blue bars during the summer to help us collect back the money that we spent. And with the war, just the opposite happened. It's now that we believe that we'll spend more in power than we're going to collect for every month of the rest of the year. And this has resulted in a whopping $4.2 million deficit. If we try to pay back that entire deficit over the current year, which is good practice for cost causation reasons, we anticipate about 85,000 kilowatt hours remaining from July through December that we could collect it over. So if we try to collect 4.2 million over 84,329, that works out to be 5 cents a kilowatt hour that we would have to raise rates. And that amounts to about a $30 per month increase for the median customer. So it's very large. But what you need to recognize is that we are not alone in this problem. There are, you may have seen news stories. I think Brian, you just sent around one the other day that showed New Hampshire's expecting, what was it, a $50 or an $80 a month increase to customers?
Muted.
A $70 monthly bill increase in New Hampshire.
So these are extraordinary costs. We know it's going to be painful for customers, but everybody is more or less in the same boat. And it would be imprudent of us if we didn't try to collect this money. Power supply costs are supposed to be revenue neutral for the utility. So we can't ask the utility to try to pay for, that deficit. For number one, we don't have the funds to do it. And number two, it's, policy and law that customers need to pay what it costs to buy the power. So that's my introduction, Dave.
And it's my understanding from the EIA that New England is particularly vulnerable to this price spike because about over 50% of our generation in the region is natural gas for electricity. So I think their graphics showed it went from $50 to $153 per megawatt hour based on the price spike. So this is a big expense in natural gas that needs to be collected for. I'm gonna open up any kind of questions to board members, but I'm going to wait until we get done with the 3 rates to open up public comments before we close the rate hearing, so that we can discuss the NIPA and how we're trying to reduce this burden to customers. So Pam Hill.
Just, I think we may have covered this, but I just want to refresh my memory here. Are we using this as an opportunity to educate and encourage energy efficiency?
Yes. So
you just refresh my memory on how we're going to do that and how aggressive we're going to be with that particular, because this is obviously a difficult situation, but it's also an opportunity.
Yeah. So there was a web page created that had a link to, so it discussed this change, and there's a link to all of the resources on energy efficiency.
I guess my question is more, I'm aware of that. Is there any way to put a little uptick in the energy efficiency encouragement component of this? I don't know how you market these things, but I mean, I just wonder if we could be, promoting it a little bit more than we normally do, but I don't want to waste a lot of time on it. I just want to make sure we're looking at that.
Yeah, so I would love to call on Jan Setti or Carol to tell us about any kind of bill inserts or other efforts, but I don't see them on. Dave, do you want to try to answer?
Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty healthy energy efficiency budget. It gets, pushed out there in many different ways. So we're constantly working with that. If you're talking about adding more to it, that's, another discussion we'd have to have, because we budgeted X amount, and going over that, it would impact the bottom line. So I think we're promoting it, and we're doing pretty well with our programs.
I guess just last word on this. I guess I understand that this is a fairly dramatic increase for people, and as such, it's going to get people's attention, and that is, I think, a real opportunity. So I'm not a marketing person. I don't know how to deal with this stuff, but I would encourage us to think long and hard about maybe, doing some more to grab the opportunity in the crisis, as it were.
Brian, would it be helpful to show Pam the webpage?
No, please don't. It's okay, Laura. I've seen it. But,
no, basically, it's a new page talking about the 2022 power cost adjustment, and it shows the large increase per month. And right below that is a huge box that says, "Want to learn more about reducing your electricity use?" And it has a link that you can just click right from there. So right after the message that says prices are going up dramatically, the next thing down below it is, huge letters want to learn more about reducing your electricity use.
Yeah, no, I see.
Okay.
And I don't want to belabor it. I just think it's, yeah.
I'm gonna move on. Alice, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just a
Wendy, I
quick,
see you have a question waiting.
this is just a quick, two quick comments. First, I want to thank Laura. This was an amazing presentation, as were all the materials presented for today's packet. So I know a lot of work went into that, and they were extremely well done, clear, and I really appreciated them. I just want to remind us at the last meeting, we did talk about the need for communications. So I think we talked about using Erin to be able to get a townwide news and notices out, or something that allows us to get a wider band of communications options than what we do. And I didn't know about the webpage, I'm sorry, but maybe we give that to her as well to market townwide, either on Twitter, Facebook, wherever, say, prices are rising, as you see everywhere, whatever the messaging is. I think she'd be good at that. And we did talk about the last meeting. So it's just, I wanted to remind us when Pam was asking about a refresher.
Yeah,
But
and Alice,
all the
to that
efforts are
point-
good.
To that point, that's exactly what we're planning on doing.
Perfect.
Depending on the direction that the board went in with this. So once the vote was done, and we knew what the numbers were, that's what our intent is.
Perfect. Thank you.
And Warren, I see you have your hand up, but I'm going to go to Wendy, who's patiently waiting.
So Brian, thanks. I just want to reiterate the same points that Alice said, that I did recall we were going to have some promotion around this because it is critical. And I don't know if there's going to be a bill insert as well, maybe pushing people to that webpage, but it sounds like you've got this well in hand. So thank you.
Great. And Warren?
Do we have projections of electricity costs next year? Obviously, then, it's hard to be reliable that much ahead of time, but do we have a sense of where the projections are things will be in 2023?
So we generally don't do the projections until about October, when we're getting through the budget cycle, because they fluctuate so much. And if we did them really early, we're going to be really off. And even last year when we did them, October, November, and we came into the winter months, the projections weren't where they needed to be. And that's where the PCA came in. So we really can't do them right now with any scale of accuracy.
Okay, thanks. I mean, it just would be nice in announcing the rate change without making promises to put something in that indicates we're not sure, given the market, whether this is going to be a temporary spike in rates or whether there'll be some relief in the future. We can't predict that, but it'd be nice for folks to know that we're not necessarily counting on this being the new rate in perpetuity.
Yeah, so to that point, when we get closer to the end of the year, we'll be bringing rates to the board for probably a December vote for what the rates will be in 2023. And we'll have a better sense then if this is the new norm or if they're going to come back down.
Thank you.
And the price that we've set the PCA at is targeting that will end the year with full collections. So we shouldn't take the burden of 2022 and bring it into 2023. Is there any other board questions? I don't see any. So I'm going to ask that we move on to the EV commercial charging rate.
Brian, before you do that, did you want us to bring up the PCA tariff so you guys can see it?
Yes, that would be great.
So I know Brian mentioned that staff would prepare a new rate schedule regarding the change in the PCA for the board to vote on. But I just wanted to bring to your attention that we won't actually be presenting you with a new tariff because the tariff does not call out the factor that the utility uses to achieve parity with rate costs. The exact wording of this says that the price for all the energy we supply to the customers assumes a base cost of 11.429 cents per kilowatt hour. Okay, that's what is in rates that we are collecting for power. And so what we do with the PCA is we take constantly changing actual costs, compare them to the 11,429, and that's what results in that 5 cents per kilowatt hour, which can be adjusted from time to time. So the PCA rate schedule was meant to not have to bring back constantly changing rate tariffs, but to allow the utility to adjust what they call the factor. It says the PPA factor is applied in order to equate actual power supply costs with revenues collected through the base rate. So just to reiterate, we're not bringing a new tariff sheet to you, but you would be voting to change the PCA from its current level of 90 points to 5.9 cents.
Right, and there was a page before that rate sheet that kind of outlined that in a memo.
You have that, Dave?
Yep. And
Okay, so
that's the summary of what Laura went over.
I'll just let you read it because it's short.
All right, so I can share this with anyone who requests it later on if they don't have time to look at it in the video or here. So I would like to keep moving and go to the EV commercial charging rate. Laura, do you want to give a brief summary of this rate and the rate schedule?
Is that what you want, Dave?
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Okay, so if you could bring that document up that we prepared. I think the big issue here for the board is there's a challenge here where we want to incentivize commercial EV charging. The only way staff could think of doing this prudently, which means we want to encourage more electric vehicles, but we don't want them charging during the peak. And how do we ensure that that's the case with commercial customers who tend to charge during the day? The only way staff could think of to do that was to create a new rate. And the board has stated in the past that one of their goals is to reduce the number of rates that CMLP has, to reduce the complexity, which is both confusing to customers and difficult for CMLP to administrate. And so we're coming to you today with a proposed new rate. It would be a new tariff. It would be added to our repertoire of tariffs, which goes against what you said. And so I think you need to make a value judgment on whether the expected benefits from this new rate schedule outweigh the disadvantage of adding more rate complexity. So that's sort of the overview. What the rate does, as we've discussed many times, but Warren, I know this is new to you, is it would be for commercial customers only. We already have a time of use rate for residential customers, but not for general service customers.
And well, sorry,
go ahead.
Laura, this will also be available to multifamily housing.
Yep, if the account is held by a commercial customer, which it typically would be for like an apartment.
Okay.
In order to take advantage of this rate, a customer would need to install their new electric vehicle charging equipment on a separate meter and charged below, according to the factors below. And what it would be is that we've had many discussions about, would a customer pay additional meter charges because this is going to be an additional meter to their existing account. They're going to probably have a house account for their building or their apartment building. This is going to be an additional meter, which usually requires a separate meter charge. However, depending on how, whether or not they're going to pay the charge depends on the wiring. The way our tariffs work is that if the customer is sub or multi-metered to an existing account, then this meter charge would be waived. So it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, but for commercial customers, if they do have to pay the new rate, it's going to be $16.80 for small commercial, which is the same rate as the existing small commercial meter charge, $51.50 for medium, and $416 for large. And the definitions of what makes a customer small, medium, and large are their maximum monthly demands, which are listed here to the right. So the small ones use less than 20 kilowatt hours. The mediums use more than 20, but less than 200, and the larges use more than 200. Customers on this rate schedule would pay a $1.83 per kilowatt per month charge, which is far less than the $10 to $12 they would pay under an existing medium or general service demand rate. The transmission, distribution, and energy are what we've discussed in the past. It's expensive for peak charging. It's not so expensive for mid-peak, and it's very competitive for off-peak. Of course, these rates, like all rates, would be adjusted in accordance with the purchase power cost adjustment clause. We have made a proposed suggested change to the billing periods. Initially, when we described this program to you back in November of 2021, we had thought that having some symmetry to the hours might help customers remember them. So we were trying to make everything begin or end on a 4 or an 8. And so the peak in the evening was 4 to 8 p.m. And in the morning, we had it as 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. But that doesn't align very well with when our peaks actually occur. We do get peaks in the morning, particularly in the winter. And so we are proposing to change the mid-peak to start at 6 a.m., end at 4. And then off-peak would be, which used to start at 10, would now be from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. And off-peak is also all day on Saturday and Sunday. And the rest of the tariff just goes through how the billing demand is calculated, which is the same as the way it's calculated for medium and large commercial customers right now. It's just that it's going to be billed at a much smaller rate. We're proposing that customers who undertake this rate, if you go to the next page, Dave.
That's the end.
Oh, no. Okay. My mistake. Yep. All right. So that's pretty much the form of tariff that we're putting forth to you today to consider.
And a question about we're unlike the EV, the shared charging rate, we're not concerned about idle time. We're letting the commercial entity decide how to deal with turnover of vehicles, whether or not they want to charge an hourly fee, or if they want to charge a per kilowatt hour idle fee for times when a vehicle is parked there, but not actively charging. So
this tariff would be applicable to the party that installs the electric vehicle charging and who is a commercial customer of CMLPs right now. So this would look like any other electric load and would be charged on a per kilowatt hour basis, unlike the way CMLP charges for electric vehicle charging to the people who are actually charging their cars. This rate schedule was developed in conjunction with a proposed new rebate program, which would help commercial customers offset the cost of level 2 charging installation. And that's providing funds up to $6,000 per dual port station. Those monies would be in addition to what a customer could get under the state rebate program. So that combined, those two rebates would actually make it nearly free for commercial entities to install electric vehicle charging. But as part of the rebate program, we're requiring the customer to provide certain things to CMLP. One is they have to provide their charging data information to us. Like, we want to know when cars are charging because we need to gather that data for commercial entities. And they would also, CMLP would need to approve what the charging station installers plan to charge their customers for the electric vehicle service. And that's because we still want to have good pricing behavior. Like, we don't like offering it for free, but if the customer comes forward and has a good argument for it, we might accept it. But basically, we're just requiring them to present what they plan to charge to their customers, and we want to be able to approve it. And that's part of the rebate program. It has nothing to do with this tariff rate. But the rebate program requires the customer to go on this tariff rate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is complicated because we're trying to meet a need that we have not found another solution for. And we talked about this 6 months ago. We talked about this last 2 weeks ago. It's a difficult problem to solve with the current technology. Hopefully with AMS coming, that we'll be able to make a more simplified solution to this. But that's theoretical. Do any of the board members have questions about this rate? Alice?
So I'm trying to understand the context of it. How many customers how many potential customers do you think that we have who might take up this rate? And if we know that, is it because they're mostly charging fleet vehicles on that large volume over 200 kilowatt? I just wonder what we know about the market for what we're doing. It
So
sounds like this is temporary options, listening to what Brian just said.
I've got 2 customers waiting in the wings, hot and heavy on this. I got
Okay.
emails on Sunday, and I have a promise to send them immediately the results of your vote so that they can plan. One of the one on Sunday was the Thoreau Club. So that gives you an idea of the type of customer. And there's another one. And I think there's probably, at least half a dozen, maybe 6 to 12. But maybe when they find out how cost effective it is with our rebate combined with the state rebate, maybe that'll, get even more people to do it. And we'll be surprised, at how many, at the uptake.
And that's a big caveat, is the EVIP grant from the state is available now, but it may not be available in the future. So that's why commercial customers may be apt to move quickly to get those funds. I know the Wheelhouse used those funds to do their installation of EV charging. Alice, do you have more questions?
Just a quick one. So if in a year from now, when we deploy AMI, what happens to these customers? I mean, I assume it'll take some number of months for this to be installed and for this to get going. So in a year from now, when we have AMI, so I think Brian mentioned, or somebody mentioned about AMI being the next big technology for this. How will that affect the customers that invest now, aside from the incentives from the federal government?
Yeah, so my comment was theoretical, because I know we'll have more capabilities as a utility then. What that will look like, I don't exactly know. There is no plan for 2 years from now on what this rate would change to. Hopefully, I mean, this is a complicated rate structure, and I'm hoping that technology will allow it to simplify. But
my question was not about rates, it was about the technology. If we're requiring the installation of a sub meter or an additional meter, and we're then going within a year transitioning to AMI, will that make their investment and the federal government's investment obsolete because it's no longer necessary? No, I'm seeing heads shaking no. Okay.
No.
Thank you.
It would simply make the rate that we charge them more streamlined and more simple than it is today.
Okay.
I'm going to let Wendy had her hand up earlier.
So I just had 2 questions. One was about the meter and the compatibility for our strategy was one question. And then the second question was related to the change in the peak, the mid-peak, and being 2 hours earlier, and just kind of curious on what customer insight might have driven that change outside of just making hours even. But is there any customer data behind the usage of that change? And do we see customers using those earlier hours? I would think the Throw Club might actually see that.
Yeah. So we've always known that 6 to 8 a.m. is a time period when we can see peaks, is particularly in the winter. When we first designed the program, we thought it was more important because it was complex to simplify it as much as possible. And so we were sacrificing cost, i.e. in the morning. It's not that the customer behaviors change, that's always been the same. But we thought that the symmetry of the hours was an important sort of marketing component. But I think, at least my opinion has changed on that. The rate's complicated enough that the symmetry on the rates, I don't think is going to actually help all that much. And so I thought it was more important for us to cover the cost portion. So the rate, the usage has always been there, Wendy, and we've always known about it. And then rate, Dave, could you just confirm, I think Alice and Wendy both asking the same questions. When we get new AMI meters, are we necessarily going to rip out the ones that we're just installing here, or could we keep, because we're going to have to install a smart meter to do this rate anyway, right?
Right, I'm assuming.
Yeah, we're gonna have to install a smart meter, and I think one of the big decisions we're gonna have to make is, when we switch over to a new system, are we replacing the existing smart grid meters that we have? And I think the answer is yes.
So we would be
Interesting.
ripping them out again in another, well, I think a year, guys, might be a little optimistic. So let's talk about maybe 1 to 2 years.
Right. So currently we use the Next Grid meters as our smart meters, but we would be going to, whatever the AMS project comes up with our new smart meters to be, which will not be Next Grid. So that we know. So yeah, 1 to 2 years for that deployment to happen, that installation of AMS. So we'd need a smart grid, a Next Grid meter in the interim. Pam or Warren, do you have any questions on this?
I just want to confirm, make sure I understand this. So the installation of the hardware might need to be replaced in a couple of years. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. And what would the difference in would anybody be unhappy about this, or is it sort of part of what's going on now, where technologies are changing so fast, everybody gets it, and what would the loss be of having this two-part thing going on? If it's a non-issue, I don't think you even need to answer me, but if anyone thinks that this is something that will be of concern.
So to answer your question, Pam, from our standpoint, we would install a meter when someone adopted and bought into the program. So you'd have a cost for that meter. And then when we get the new metering platform in place, we would be replacing that meter. So you'd have a little stranded investment in that original meter, but there's no way to really avoid that if we want to have a program for this.
Yeah. Okay, and the stranded investment is, quantify that for me? Is it?
It depends on the type of meter that is installed, whether it's a G1 or G2 or G3. They're all different dollar amounts. So,
but they're hundreds of dollars for those meters, not thousands.
Okay.
And yeah, and when we go to AMS in 2 years, when we do this installation, all of the smart meters that exist in town will need to be replaced, because we're going to get rid of the Next Grid meters and we're going to go to the new AMI meters.
Thank you.
Warren, did you have any question? Okay. I'm going to move us on to the discussion about the NIPA rate.
okay. So some of you have seen the first part of this memo. It's pretty standard. We send it out every time we do an adjustment. So I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time on the beginning part, but Laura's going to speak to what's going on with the NIPA and the balance and what we proposed.
Let's actually go to the chart, Dave, on the next page. I think it's easier for people to digest. Can you make the picture maybe just a tad smaller, Dave? Just one smaller? Yeah, that's good. Okay, so this chart's busy, but it's telling us a lot of information. Let's go back to January of 2018, and what it shows is every month we calculate what we call the savings of NIPA power. NIPA power, based on its cost to procure in New York and then the cost to transmit it from New York to New England, we compare that to what we would have to pay if we didn't have it, which is basically New England prices. And every time that the NIPA power is cheaper than New England prices, we register a savings for that. Okay, so that's in the blue bar. The red bars are the amount that was given to customers in that month based on what the NIPA credit that had been approved was. And typically, you see these happen in tranches. So like from January of 18 to whatever that is, August of 18, you can see the credit given was at a very low amount. Then we made an adjustment, right? And it went up for a while, and then we made another adjustment. And then we made an adjustment. So you can see the red bars happen in sort of a step fashion, while the blue bars are floating monthly. And the green line is the amount of cumulative balance of the NYPA credit in reserve. So if it was starting at, say, $25,000 in January of 18, every time the blue bar is bigger than the red bar, then that green line is going to go up because we're adding to savings. And when we start giving back more than it's worth, which you can see starting in about May of 2019, then that green line starts to go down because we're giving customers back from the balance. So when we started January of 2021, the balance was between 100 and 150,000. And initially the credit that was set was a little bit higher than what it was worth. But then as the year progressed and energy prices increased, the NYPA power is largely fixed in nature. So we started to build the balance back up. And then you can see a couple of really big months where blue is sky high, which is the value of NYPA power. And that's happening because the New England electricity prices got to be so high. They were $180, $190, $200. So if NYPA only costs you, $20, then the savings is very large. And so the cumulative balance has skyrocketed. I want to say skyrocketed. It's gone up quite a bit. And it's sitting right now at about $250,000. This is money that we could give back to customers, keeping in mind that this NYPA, the benefit of NYPA power by law is only passable to residential customers. Commercial customers are not eligible for this benefit. And that's not something CMLP decides. That's something that's written into the contract of the NYPA power. So what should we, the NYPA adjustment right now is, what is it? It's $1.50. Right? I think that's right.
Sounds right.
Yeah, it's $1.50. And so what should we change it to? These are all negative numbers because they're all credits to customers. And what I've set up here is a table with 4 possible choices. And the reason for 4 is that there are a couple big decisions you all could make. One is, do you want to draw down the balance of that fund or not? Do you want to maintain it at $250,000, or do you want to use that money to give it back to customers? Keeping in mind that they're going to be experiencing a large rate increase when we institute the PCA. So if you want to draw it down, you can see the credits are larger than if you don't want to draw it down, if you want to maintain the balance. The other choice is whether or not you want to assume that the current high prices in New England persist. So in the case where we're most conservative and we only want to increase the rate, the credit from, say, $0.015 to 3.9 cents, which is the top left corner of the box. That's assuming we don't want to draw down the balance, and we don't want to assume that we're going to keep seeing those incredibly high prices that the blue bars generated on the previous page. You'd only raise the credit to 3.9 cents, which would amount to about a $2.96 savings on a customer's bill, compared to like $1.13 they're getting today. If you want to maintain the balance, but assume the current pricing continues, then you could increase the credit from the $0.015 to 8.7 cents. Similarly, if you wanted to assume historical pricing but draw it down to 0, you could increase the credit to 12 cents. And if you want to draw down and assume current pricing, you could draw it down by 17 cents, which I'll just point out we've never, in my history, ever done. The NYPA credit's never been that large, but we're in very unusual times. So that's kind of what we've laid out here, are some bookends based on different assumptions. And you would need to figure out whether or not you want to draw the balance down and what you want to do about assuming the current pricing versus using historical pricing.
So, Laura, the question to the board is two parts. What do we think about current pricing? Do we think it's going to continue to stay high? And two, do we want to draw down this balance or not draw it down or maintain it? In any of these scenarios, we're increasing the credit given to customers as a way to give bill relief for the increase of the PCA.
Yeah, I would just, I guess I wouldn't ask the board to weigh in on whether they think the current pricing is going to persist or not. I guess what I would more ask them to do is, when setting the PCA amount, would you feel from a risk perspective, that we should assume what the market is currently saying the forward price should be, or should we revert to a more risk adverse assumption of historical pricing?
I'm going to ask Warren to ask this question, and then I'll go on to Wendy.
Two things. One comment, I think we should try to give a significant amount back to customers, in part to even out prices, even if we have to reverse that next January. It still seems better to give a slightly smaller bump in prices now and another small bump in January than some big bump now and nothing then. Secondly, in terms of the issue of assuming current prices, isn't it the case that if prices go down, it means that because of the price adjustments we're putting on people's electricity bills, CMLP will be in much better financial shape because the power you're buying on the spot market won't be costing you so much. And so that even if you aren't doing as well in this NIPA fund, you'll be in effect getting the money back by not having to pay as much on the power you're purchasing.
We're not allowed to cross the monies in these accounts. They're purpose built accounts, if you will, and they must be tracked separately. So we're unable to borrow from one to pay for the other. But you are right in a sense, I think, Mr. Leon, because if prices go down and we need to reduce the NIPA credit, we're also likely to not have to charge the customer as much for power. And so from the customer's perspective, they do cross each other out, but not from the CMLP perspective.
Yeah, if I could make one more comment in response to that, it seems we should be making the same assumption in both the rates we're now going to be charging customers and our assumption about NIPA, and our assumption that you're making in the rate you're proposing to customers is that the current prices are going to remain the same through the rest of the year. I'm not sure why we would want to make a different assumption for this NIPA charge than we're making in terms of what we're charging our ratepayers.
Good point. Wendy, do you have a question?
Muted.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. So when we say drawdown, usually we have a minimum floor that we want to retain in that fund, Laura. So when we say drawdown, we're not drawing down the whole thing, right? So what were your expectations when you said drawdown?
So the bookend that I provided did assume 100% drawdown, and I was meaning to give you, like I said, the bookends. Okay. If you ask me a specific question about, like if you say I want $100,000 minimum balance in that account, or I want 50,000, we can calculate what the precise rate would be. So maybe coming out of this meeting, what you all could decide is some policy decisions that say we want to draw the account down to level X, and we want to assume the same, current forward pricing that's in the base rate. And then CMLP go tell us what that per kWh amount is. And actually, I could probably do that on the fly, because I imagine you want to vote on it today so we can get it on July bills.
So that is kind of where I'm going. I didn't think it would be zero, because in the past, when we've looked at this, we've always made some assumption that there'd be some balance that we'd be targeting. So maybe that's a question to the board, but I also agree that we want to give back funds where we can. And so if I look historically at what those balances are, it's been all over the place, right? But generally, I don't know, I don't think we'd want to draw it down below 75,000, just looking at the history, but other people can weigh in on that. But I also agree that we should assume that those rates are going to remain high for the same reason that we're retaining the PCA, or I'm assuming we'll increase the PCA. And we can always adjust this again, right? I think we have to look at everything all over again in the fall, right? In anticipation of the rates. So
that's been the history. Like when the balance gets up there, we draw it down, and you're right, we don't draw it down generally to zero, but when we start getting closer to the floor, then we ask the board to adjust it again. And I think we'd be talking about the same thing here, something similar. And if you guys, set, a minimum amount in the balance, that would be helpful for us.
Alice, Alice or Pam, do you have any comments on this?
No, generally agree with the sense of the board.
Okay.
So I have a question that just relates to the floor that we would set. Is there a recommendation from CMLP about what is a comfort level to have as a floor of reserves from the PCA?
Yeah, I mean, we've actually years ago went in the negative, and that was really uncomfortable, and we had to make the change. I wouldn't want to do that again. I want to have a minimum of 50,000 in there. And keeping an eye on it so that when, if we got to 75, bring it to the board's attention so that we could start the discussion on, changing it again.
Seems reasonable. That's what I sort of wanted your input on that decision. I think that sounds reasonable to me.
I think it is too. Thanks.
So I would like to ask, Dave, do you mind putting up on the screen the fourth page where it shows that table of drawdown, maintain balance?
What was the minimum you said, Dave? 50,000?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, if you guys want to assume current forward prices and end up with 50,000, and this again, of course, these are, it's a moving target because we know that monthly value changes, but right now as a snapshot, to end with 50,000, the credit would be 15.2 cents. So I'd probably just round that to 15 cents.
So I would like to ask each board member where they feel they're comfortable on the amount of this credit between the 3.9 cents to the 16.8. Alice, how do you feel? Do you feel?
I feel pretty comfortable with what was just presented, 15.15 cents, 15.02 cents, as being the credit that we would get and retain the balance of 50,000. We've done it in 2015. What we don't have is the context for the ending balances of over 300,000. I don't recall a war, but maybe there was, or some other major change in the market. But there was some great fluctuation as we look at that chart.
Yeah, I'm not as comfortable going that high with the credit because I do not want to see this fund go negative if if our assumptions on current prices don't hold. I'm more comfortable at the say 10 to 12 cent credit area, but I want to hear from others. Wendy, what do you think?
So I was listening to Dave, and his comment was that if he saw something at this $75,000 balance, he would bring that to the board. So okay. With that in mind, assuming it wouldn't flip that fast, I'm comfortable with the 50,000 balance. 15 cents.
So the 15 cents.
Yeah.
Alice, you had a question? Sorry, I didn't mean.
Yeah. It was similar to what I think Wendy just asked. We can come back and readjust this if we find that things are totally out of whack in the market. That we can come back and readjust the power cost assessment as we've done in other ones.
Yeah. So my concern is that we're kind of using up all our powder on on reducing this balance, and that if we come into a situation in 2022 or 2023 where we then have to remove the credit completely because the fund balance is too low, we don't have any rate relief next year. So that's my concern. Warren, do you have a thought on? Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I'm comfortable with the 15 cents. And the issue is if we have to remove the credit, yes, that would reduce some of the rate relief. But the reason we would be having to reduce this is because the power we're purchasing on the market is less expensive than we thought. And so we may be able to change the PPA adjustment a comparable amount, if not more. So I'm comfortable with the 15 cents.
Okay, and Pam.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm right with the 50,000. It all makes sense to me, and we can adjust going forward if we have to. I also want to suggest that I know there are policy decisions here, but in these situations, deference to the experts in the light plant is important, and I also am listening carefully to the numbers that they're providing us with respect to the for example the 50,000, etc. So I'm bottom line comfortable with what seems to be the majority view of the board.
All right, with the board's views, Dave and Laura, what are your views?
So, I mean, I think we should be drawing it down. That's what the balance is there for. Historically, that's what we've done. And I think having a floor number established is helpful for us because it's something we can look at and make sure we don't go negative. And as I said earlier, we've gone negative years ago, and that was uncomfortable because then we had to build it back up and there was really no credit for a period of time. So I'd want to avoid that. And I think if we go forward with drawing it down, knowing that we have a floor number that we'll bring back to the board to revise the credit, then I think I'm comfortable with it.
Okay.
So wait, I'm sorry, but we're talking 50,000. Your floor is, yeah.
We would get, if you see it come close to 75, you'd bring it to the board before then, right? You're not going to wait. Okay.
Laura, your thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to mention a couple things. One is one of the reasons this thing fluctuates so much, and it seems like we're always trying to catch up to it, is because they don't tell us for 2 months what the savings were because the transmission expenses get allocated in such a belated manner. And so, we can promise to come back and tell you when we're breaching 75,000, but I just want to set expectations that, I may come back with my tail between my legs saying, hey, we breached that 2 months ago. I mean, we'll try not to, but these big numbers flying around, 1 month could swing us one direction or the next, but we can always change this. 15 cents, my opinion is 15 cents is historically extremely high for the credit. However, we're in extremely extraordinary circumstances right now, right? And so I guess I'm comfortable with the 15 cents, provided that we keep a very close eye on it. We all know we don't want to get the balance down too low or eliminate it. And if we need to, we'll just come back and change it again.
Okay. At this point, I'd like to get public comment on any of the 3 rates we've discussed. So if anyone wants to raise their hand and comment on this before we close the rate hearing and vote, please raise your hand. I don't see any hands raised, so I think we're ready to do a motion to close the rate hearing.
I move that we close the rate hearing.
Seconded.
Excellent. And I will do a roll call. So Alice?
Yes.
Wendy?
Yes.
Warren?
Yes.
Pam?
Yes.
And I also agree. So we've closed the rate hearing, and now we will do go on to the next agenda item. We're running about 20 minutes late, but we're going to do the actual votes. So could I have a motion on the PCA cost adjustment for us to vote on the rate schedule. Wendy, can you help me out?
Yeah, I'm just trying to find the paper.
Dave, do you
Okay.
want to bring up that Word document, Dave?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the rate.
hold on a second.
Yeah, actually, I can do it. Have it.
I've got it open, Dave, if you want.
Yeah, that would be helpful because it's
Okay.
not,
All right, I apologize. I shared the whole desktop because I couldn't find which document it was. But that is the change in the memo. And the rate schedule doesn't mention the pricing. But would someone like to make a motion?
So I'll make a motion that I don't know if we're not changing the schedule, but I'd like to make a motion that we approve the power cost adjustment factor from its current level of 0.009 kilowatt per hour to 0.59 kilowatts effective July 1st, 2022 bills or July 2022 bills.
And do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I'm going to do roll call. Wendy,
Yes.
Alice,
Yes.
Pam,
Yes.
Warren,
Yes,
and I also agree. Great. Now let's go to the rate schedule for the EV commercial charging. Do I have a motion to approve this rate schedule?
I'll make a motion that we approve the rate G4 general service electric vehicle charging schedule as discussed in our meeting today and as displayed here.
And do I have a second?
Second that.
And Alice,
Yes.
Wendy,
Yes.
and
Yes.
Warren,
yes.
and I also agree. Great. And finally, let me, for the NIPA, so on this, we've agreed on 15 cents. And so who would like to make the motion to approve a 15 cent?
Can I ask, oh, I'm sorry. I just
Go
want
ahead. No, go ahead.
is
Pam.
it, are we sensitive to 15.2 or 15? I mean, I heard Laura say we'd round it, but I'm just curious, are we supposed to be more precise than that or not?
no, you don't need to be. I would do a round number.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
And Wendy, you want to make a motion?
Yeah, so I'll make a motion that we adjust the New York Power Authority power cost adjustment for residential payers such that we retain a $15,000 balance and
50,000.
50,000 and assume that we'll provide residents with a credit of 15 cents.
And do I
Second,
have a second?
Second.
Okay. Alice,
Yes.
Wendy,
Yes.
Pam,
Yes.
Warren,
yes.
and I also agree. So great. So that ends all the rate discussions and we're able to move on to, and I'm going to stop sharing so everybody can see each other. So thank you for that. That was the reason that we really had to have this meeting today. The agenda also has a topic that was bumped from our last meeting to this one, which is Article 38 in-town solar. This is a board discussion on how we want to approach fulfilling this article, the urging of this article. And I had sent around a scope of work previously that kind of outlined some of the questions I had. And I've heard from a few of you on your concerns and considerations, but I'd like to have a discussion amongst the board and then have public comment on what is it that we need to accomplish to create this plan and schedule as outlined in Article 38. What are the barriers? What are the concerns? What questions need to be answered? This is like blue sky, throw it all on the table, and then we'll talk about ways to approach answering these. So how would someone like to state their concerns, or I could do that as well?
Brian, I just, if I may, or,
Yeah, well, please go right ahead.
oh, okay, I just, one thing that occurred to me, and it may be covered and I missed it, is just the problem of disposal of solar panels 25 years out. If that's not addressed, I do think we owe it to the future to address it. And just maybe it's a little too in the weeds, but I think it's important.
Okay. We can add that as a concern to be addressed as to how our panels recycled. And Alice, you have a question? Or
No,
you
I
want
think-
to add some comments?
I do. So I think I agree with most of the questions that are laid out here. My question is more about our strategy on how to approach answering them. The model I think that was used with the Energy Futures Task Force was for us to seat a committee of well-informed citizens who want to begin working on in-town solar in some capacity, that have some experience. So rather than expect that we would hire an outside consultant to answer all those questions and even to reframe those questions, that I would wonder why we wouldn't want to have a citizen committee, which has been the practice of our community. I think hiring a consultant was not we didn't provide, or it wasn't provided for at town meeting, that there would be initial costs for the implementation of this article. So we'd have to find appropriate funding. And many of the questions, I think, are ones that citizens can, or volunteers can address in the way that the Energy Futures Task Force did. The big questions. I think there probably are the economic models that we probably would need assistance in developing. But the general questions about, already doing the inventories, we have a good report that shows, that has the inventory of sites. So I don't want us to start from zero and hire a consultant to reiterate everything that a committee could do for them and save the big questions for where we actually need the help. That's just, so mine's a process question. How do we want to approach addressing Article 38? That was my only question.
That's a good point. Warren, you wanted to?
Yeah. When I look at this, there's a tight timeline for this. Recommendations are supposed to be made by the end of the year. Right. There's a long list of questions on this agenda, some of which are interesting questions worth knowing about, but it's not clear they're crucial to be answered by the end of the year. With all due respect, Pamela, I think the question of, for example, what happens to the panels after their life, it's an interesting question. We don't need an answer to that by the end of the year.
Absolutely,
The question of how the emissions of solar compare to the emissions from purchasing power through a PPA, it's an interesting question. We don't need an answer to that by the end of the year. What we need to know, is it feasible for the town to achieve its goal of an additional 17 megawatts of solar? And the key issue there seems to be is not finding sites for the solar. We could find locations. The key thing is the capability of the distribution system to handle the additional solar. That's what we need to really know. What is going to be the most cost-effective way to get more solar onto the system? Is it by having energy storage? Is it by selling some of the power back to Eversource? Is it by restricting solar development to only certain parts of town? Is it by saying to some people who install solar that their solar is going to be curtailed during periods when we have more power than we need? That seems like the key question we need to answer, and that seems to me where the focus should be in the short run.
Thank you. And I agree. Wendy.
So, you know, my history on this, right? I was concerned about the timeline for this article, and you know, I really like Alice's recommendation to consider sort of a citizen committee. That doesn't. The concern there is that we won't get it done by the end of the year. So, if the board is ready to pursue that strategy, which I personally think is a preferred strategy, which would probably have a longer timeline, I wonder if that's it should be in our purview as a board to set that direction, recognizing that, you know, clearly the petitioner, we need to work with them. And I also want to make sure that we work with CAB, because we're really begging the question of that strategy of the 30 megawatts by 2030, right? So I want to see us collaborate with CAB on those goals as well. So just would like to consider that as well.
Great. Yeah, I agree. The timeline, I think if we can develop a strategy to tackle this problem, and it's going to take longer than the timeline allows, I think all those, you know, whether it be the petitioner, FinCom, or select board, which we're presenting to, would be willing to let us spend more time on the problem to get the answer right. I'm not as concerned about the timeline, but I want to make sure we have a plan before I ask for any extension. Alice, did you put up your hand?
I did. I think Wendy had covered most of the things, and I wanted to raise, and I really appreciate Warren's summary of an approach. I do think that in the end, the decisions will come to what are the costs for in-town solar, and whether the town has the appetite to pay that cost. And so it would go back to town meeting. And I think the obligation here is to come up with a plan that says we will identify these components over the course of whatever period of time. We need to obviously address the grid integrity at the same time, and there are substantial costs to doing that. And I think we need to understand what that construct is, and that would also have to go to town meeting as we talk about upgrades to our grid to either allow us to do electrification or additional in-town solar. Yeah. So those are my thoughts about this, is that in either of these or any of these scenarios, it will require that we go to town meeting for a vote on the costs that are inherent in any major redesign of the grid or in adding in-town solar.
Great.
I guess, Alice, just my only comment on that is that we have an infrastructure issue right now, and I don't want to tie that to this initiative. We need to make sure as a board that we've addressed that strategically, independent of this.
That's a good point.
I'm going to, Warren, I see your hand, but I'm going to let Pam Hill speak. I haven't heard from her
No,
yet.
I just want to emphatically endorse what Wendy just said. But back to the process question, the article, I gather, asks the municipal light plant to develop a plan. I just want us to think about our farming out all these things to volunteer committees, and hope that they have the wherewithal and the expertise. But I do wonder whether this is one of those things, like broadband perhaps was, where the expertise lies with the light plant, and the article asked for the plant to come up with a plan. So I just I think I would encourage us to think about whether we should be just, in the first instance, getting a plan that basically captures some of the stuff that Warren so appropriately flagged on timeframes and stuff, and get to the heart of the first issues and set an approach. But I guess I'm offering us to be sure we think about whether the right place to have this thing done is in the light plant.
So my comment on that would be, since spring of 2017, the town has experienced solar saturation, meaning that we have seen load at the substation drop quite low. And that was many years ago. And this article really came to town meeting because of inaction. And like the broadband task force, having citizens engaged on a very narrow, specific topic can help staff really move the ball forward. And so that's what I think a citizen committee could really help with, is gathering all the data, getting feedback, and really getting solutions developed for those barriers.
Just a quick response to that. I mean, I think maybe Article 38 was the thing that might be seen as the propeller for the light plant to get moving. I do think it's an important question, though, to be, populating this complex area with yet another volunteer group of people. I was the chair of the Energy Future Task Force. It was not an easy lift at all, and we were fortunate to have some real experts. But I do think we should think twice about populating these issues always with citizens groups. I'm a volunteer myself, obviously, but I guess I would be interested in what Dave, if Dave has any thoughts about this. If Dave thinks that please let's have a bunch of other people take the first look, fine. But I'd love to hear your views.
If I could step in and make a comment in response. I'm generally in agreement with Pamela that the light plant has some specialized expertise here. But I think there's a sort of mid-range position. The issues that I raise, which seem to me the key, most time-sensitive issues, are technical issues where a citizen committee is not the best way to grow, where the light plant, perhaps with a consultant, could address those. There are a number of the other questions on that list in terms of, say, looking at some of the locations for possible solar around the town to see whether they're suitable, to get community opinion about rates or anything else that seem well suited to a citizen committee to address those. The timeline of those can be somewhat longer than the end of the year. If we could resolve, if there's a technical solution to this problem by the end of the year, then we could have citizens help providing input about where we think solar should go in the town.
Okay, so the inverse, where you'd like the consultant to focus on the distribution system problems and then the citizen group later, instead of a citizen group kind of organizing what's out there and deciding what kind of questions we should bring to a consultant.
Well, I would not necessarily say later. I would have said the citizen group could start and deal with the questions in parallel, but questions that are not critical for a consultant to address these technical issues for the distribution system.
All right, and I'm going to go to Amanda.
I guess I would encourage that you use the boards and committees that you already have. I think that ultimately, if this does become something that the light plant is investing in, it's going to impact rates. And so the light board, you're inherently going to need to be involved regardless. And then I think on the town side, we have the CADMIS report that does look at what would it look like if the town owned solar, and CAB might be able to support that and report back to the select board. And so I think you have those citizen committees in place. And I know that I know the article urged the light board to look at this, but I also think the light board has a mission to look at a return on investment in a different way that the town does and the town can invest in a public good and maybe have a little bit longer of a return on investment. And so I think a community conversation around that would be helpful. And I think having a consultant who can do that consensus building and can really engage the public in the process beyond just committee meetings would be helpful, because I think there are some big community decisions to be made and a lot more community engagement and education that could happen, so that also we're all operating with the same facts and we know what we can do and what we can't do, and we all kind of have a similar knowledge base, because it is a complex question, and that if we go to town meeting without doing any of that pre-work, it's going to be very challenging for citizens to make any decisions.
Yeah, and I very much agree that we need to all agree upon the facts. We all need to have a shared knowledge base. I think right now there's a lot of advocates that don't understand why these things aren't moving forward, and I think there's legitimate reasons why they're not. But we need to do the work of going through that. I'm going to go to Alice, but I wanted to let Wendy know. I know you have a stop at 9, so if you need to drop, that's okay. We're hoping to end the meeting at 9, but I do want to take public comment, which I think will be extensive. So, Alice.
Well, okay, thank you. Thank you, Amanda. That was a really good way of positioning this. We do have committees that probably could take up this agenda and do a lot of the footwork. I think we are in this position because we have not done a sufficient job throughout the last, period of time on communications. And I think that's key to being able to move forward on any new agenda. So I do think that's right. And the point that I think I really just want to say is that I have an interest in, I don't know how, not protecting the light plant. The staff at the light plant are overwhelmed with the number of things that are happening. We're rolling out AMI, we're thinking about battery storage. We have really big operational questions that I know that the light plant is working with. And so adding another tangential study to the staff at the light plant doesn't seem to me doable or wise when I look at the complex questions that they're already dealing with. I don't think it was the intent to overly burden light plant staff, but I want us to be cognizant that they are working full tilt on the really big concerns. I mean, how many years have we've been working on AMI, and we're so close here that I'd hate to divert any of those resources from that effort to be able to implement Article 38. So, which is part of why I was thinking that we need a citizen group, and I think Amanda's suggestion is a good one.
And you're right. I think we do need more resources, more staff resources to handle this. But Pam Hill.
Yeah, I just a couple of things. One, just on Amanda's point about just on rates. I don't think that we are constrained on the light board to be conservative on rate decisions when we're looking at important things that affect future generations, shall we say. So I'm not experiencing my job on the light board to keep rates low, but to be reasonable about that, of course, and to represent and to understand the equities involved. So I just want to make that point. Secondly, I think there's a major issue here that Alice touched on, which I have a very different view of from Alice, I think, on the burdens on the light plant. Things have changed in the world, and we are in an inflection point with respect to understanding complicated things, dealing with issues we never thought we'd deal with 30, 40, 50 years ago. The light plant has got to respond to those things, and the town needs to understand that this will cost money, and that the staff of the light plant has to be reflective of what the light plant has to deal with. So my answer would not be, let's externalize these costs, as it were, to the public and obfuscate the fact that we have expertise that the town needs. if it wants to be really in the forefront of these important issues, but rather to ask Dave, to invite Dave to tell us what the staffing needs really are, so we're not in the position Alice believes we are, where we're saying, okay, we're just going to, go to the public for things that are extraordinarily technical. And finally, I'd like to say, ask again, Dave, what your thoughts are on the language of the article, in which, the suggestion appears to be, at least on the face of it, that you might take a stab at this, in addition perhaps to with the assistance of a consultant.
Yeah, we've been meeting internally on this article. Amanda, the facilities director, Carrie, and myself. So we've already started the process, working through a number of different pieces. It was mentioned earlier about the resale of electricity to the grid. We're going to have Energy New England come in and go through that process, so the board is educated on that. So there's a bunch of pieces, and we're working on it internally, because I do think it is for us to work on. I understand where the board is on this as well, but if we're not working on it internally, we're not going to get the results that are looked at. And we have the expertise on the distribution system, all of that. Staff is very knowledgeable on everything. So, if we need a consultant, that's something we can determine. But certain pieces of it, I think we do want to have expertise in. That resale is a perfect example of that, where Energy New England can come in and talk to that at a high level for you guys, so you understand it and know what that means, because that is one piece to this. As we move forward and look at this, if we add the additional 13 megawatts of in-town solar to come up with a 20, resale is going to be an issue. And currently, right now, we're not set up for that. But you guys are going to want to know on an economic side what that means, right? Because we're buying that energy from the solar arrays, and then we're putting it back out on the grid. There's a cost there. And you guys need to understand what that cost is, because that's where it impacts rates and the budget. So right now, internally, we're working on it as we should be. And we're going to continue to work on it and come up with a plan. I think the biggest issue, and Brian mentioned it earlier, is the timeline, right? Getting it done by the end of the year is not feasible, even if we were to hire a consultant. So that's something that I think we need to get an extension on, so that we can do it right. I think it's more important to do it right, and get the plan in place than to rush it and not do it right. And there's a lot of pieces to this, and Warren mentioned a bunch of them, and I agree with him. But this is a big lift, and it's not something we can get done by December.
Right. And I think as long as we have a defined path forward to do the right plan, I think we can get that extension. Pam.
Just quickly, and again, this is back to the Energy Future Task Force. There's a huge question on what do we mean by a plan? What do we mean by a framework? And I just wonder, a plan is a plan. We're not executing. So I trust that the plan, well, could somebody define what we mean by plan is, a plan of action going forward?
So the point
it's not execution by any means.
The point of discussion today was to put out all the ideas. It's blue sky thinking. It's putting out all the ways that we could approach this. We will have another meeting where we kind of agree on a path forward, but I think we all need to have this discussion, digest these ideas before we have the discussion about what is the framework.
No, I just wondered what I just think it's important for us to know what we mean by a plan. And maybe you want to talk about that some other day, but I think there are a lot of different ways to define what a plan is.
Yeah. So I do want to mention it is 9 o'clock. I know that Wendy may need to drop. I do want to get citizen comments. So does anyone on the board have any additional comments? Okay, then I'm going to open up for public comments, and I see Tanya has her hand up.
Good morning, Tanya Galis. I have just 62 Prescott Road. I have a couple short things to say, and then Mark is here too, and he has some other things to say.
Sure.
My comment is simply that the article, as I wrote to some of you, as circulated, was the original version that was in the town meeting warrant, but the actual what was voted on included an added sentence in lieu of an amendment that I had proposed. Dean agreed to add that sentence about preserving. Yes, I see that it's added to the document. Thank you. So my other comment based on that addition is that when contaminated sites are considered, if there are forested, if there are trees on them, that be treated as a treesy site. So that those are the only two things I want to say right now. And Mark has been taking notes about a lot of other things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mark Ailes, 62 Prescott Road. I just wanted to make a general kind of jump up suggestion that I really appreciate all this discussion and the complexity of the problem, all the trade-offs. I think some people would look at this, in the public from a very narrow point of view about where do we put solar panels or this or that, whereas all the interactions between the storage considerations, the transmission, the space, of course, 100+ acres of solar somewhere in some way, shape, or form, interaction with residential and commercial solar, policy pricing, cost to the town. So what I think is reasonable and actually most effective in the long run is to slow down and basically first bring the public along in terms of what are all the obstacles and trade-offs, rather than setting a false expectation that we can make a perfect plan and not bring the public along. Because explaining to people afterward why you made certain trade-offs, just kind of, in the long run, I think it's going to snarl things up. I think the public needs to become, interested public anyway, needs to be educated on the trade-offs and options, looking at the gaps and challenges before, having a consultant or somebody propose a narrow solution. Because I think they really need to understand the scope of the problem and what sacrifices perhaps have to be made or trade-offs. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Tanya and Mark. Dean.
I'm not gonna opine for too long. I just Dean Banfield, 73 Walden Terrace, to do the formalities. As the promoter of the article, the real thrust behind it was to kind of re-engage us with creation of solar. And we had stopped, and we had stopped for a good reason. As Brian pointed out earlier in the meeting, we have saturation issues. And fundamentally, I feel as though that's the thing we need to address. We need to address the distribution network. And once we do that, we have a lot of pieces already lying around. We've done studies for where solar could be sited. We've done proposals multiple times for particular sites. The BD has been proposed 3 different times, I believe. So there's a lot of legwork that's already been done. And the main constraint that we are up against, which is constraining our ability to do any of this, is that the distribution network is become saturated, and we need to solve that technical problem. Now, on that particular point, I think there are 2 tiers of looking at the distribution network. The first tier is, how can we solve this very near-term solar saturation question? But the long-term strategic problem that we need to really address is, as we totally units begin to engage with our GHG reduction strategies, we're going to have much higher demand for electricity. And that demand is going to shift it's going to shift us from a duck curve in the middle of the evening to 2 a.m. in the middle of the coldest night of the winter is when we are going to be using the most electricity. And the total demand on our electric grid is going to be much higher. So that's the big picture, very long-term view, but 2050 is not way, way out there. And that's the state's net zero goal. So we need to think about the big picture, and that's a strategic problem. But we also need to think about how do we just start to engage with solar, and that's a much more short-term problem. And hopefully those two kinds of problems that we're trying to solve with our distribution network, how do we prepare for the huge increases in demand that we anticipate as we electrify the vehicle and the built infrastructure? How do we anticipate the demands from that? And then how do we just engage with the solar question that I've brought forward? So there are two different things to worry about. I think that the light board needs to get eventually on a strategic pathway to thinking about that distribution network of the future. And right now we need to just engage with this problem, which is how can we add solar without damaging what we currently have? So that's what those are the main things we need to deal with. All the other problems we've addressed. We've looked at, how would we put something on a particular installation? We have a roof going on over at the Public Works Department, and there's an opportunity right there, but we aren't going to be able to do it unless we look at this distribution network. So that, however we want to address it, I'll put my hand up. You want a citizen committee? I'm there. Sign me up. But however we want to do it, I'm happy to get engaged. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Mary.
Thank you, Brian. My name is Mary Hartman. I live at 16 Concord Green. I'm a member of the select board. I just want to make a comment about your discussion around a task force of citizens or doing it internally. And my brief time on the select board, I know that we are actively trying to reduce the number of committees across town. We have way too many committees, and we have a very long list of vacancies on those task force and committees. And the other thing is that whenever you set up a committee, that also puts a burden on the associated group. So if you did a task force, that would still require a lot of work from CMLP to give them the information that they need. And you're on an aggressive timeline. Hopefully you'll get some relief on that. But I just wanted to remind you of that. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Are there any other public comments? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn. Would someone like to make that motion?
So moved.
So moved. All right. Do I have a second? I had two yeses. So, all right.
Second.
Roll call. Pam,
Yes.
Wendy,
Yes.
Warren,
Yes.
Alice,
Yes.
and I agree as well. All right. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you in 2 weeks on July 3rd.